So this video lecture will be about the allocation of aid money. Now, one of the major critiques of aid money and aid work is that it's based on plans. And plans, by definition, are politicized. So then one of the major critiques of aid is that it's a political venture before a venture that is there to help the poorest of the poor or to help people in general to escape poverty. Now, if it's politicized, money comes from the donor nation, then it's also top-down, as much as we would like to use language of bottom-up and participatory development. The money is coming from a donor country, entering into a poor region, so almost by definition, it will be top-down work. Now, traditionally, aid, when it first came about, the Marshall Plan being the first real aid project, is that it was after World War II. After World War II, we had the Cold War. So more or less from the Cold War up until 1990s, aid was an important part of this in that you would want to stop the spread of communism. So aid was very, very politicized from the end of World War II up until the 1990s. The real first objective of aid was to spread neoliberal economic ideas and stop the spread of communism. So when you're looking at aid, you're more or less looking at what has been happening since the early 1990s. I'll just kind of read you three different definitions of aid: Sweden, Canada, and Latvia, and what those different countries, how they view their aid projects. So, Sweden. The task of development cooperation is to help create conditions that are conducive to sustainable development, poverty reduction, democracy, and gender equality. This requires genuine partnership as well as real local ownership. So you can see here it's talking about sustainable development, poverty reduction. There is not a lot of language when it comes to sort of neoliberal economic growth or economic prospering. Just we want to reduce poverty, we want to have democracy, gender equality, and then more or less the country can develop on its own. Canada. Contribute to economic prosperity with an emphasis on expanding and diversifying commercial relationships with emerging and high growth markets. So, Canadian aid, which I'll talk about in another lecture, has gone through a bit of a shift in the last couple of years and is going through another one right now because we've recently had a new Prime Minister elected. But you can see here this idea of Canadian aid, it wants to sort of build commercial relationships and be able to expand its market and be able to grow economically. And that would be happening both in Canada as well as in the developing world. Latvia, they have three objectives: strengthening the role of Latvia as a bilateral donor, promotion of public awareness and support for development cooperation's goals and policy, raising role of Latvia in achieving development goals and implementing international obligations. So here when it comes to Latvia and their ideas connected with development work, a lot of it is really internal. First, making the public aware of development work. Then once the public is aware of it, and then maybe going and doing it abroad. But first it's a domestic issue first. So, when it comes to the allocation of aid money, there's sort of four reasons why you would give aid money. And the first one is need. So you'll see that there's a group of people that are extremely poor, poorest of the poor, and that they need aid money just to be able to survive, and then after that to be able to sort of grow a little bit. When it comes to this need-based idea of aid, though, you have to really question who are you supporting and what are you supporting. Are you supporting good or bad policies? Is it bad policies that the country has in place and that's why these people are particularly poor? Or maybe it's the government of that country not doing their jobs well, and that's also why these countries are particularly poor. So then if you're going in and doing aid projects, then you're sort of not directly but indirectly supporting an incompetent government. Merit would be another one. So in this idea, the developing country, they take the first step in what the donor country deems as a step towards development. So they take the first step, and then the donor countries say, okay, congratulations, you took that first step, and now we're able to assist you in your development or your growth. So you're rewarding countries for doing what you deem to be the correct thing to do. Self-interest on behalf of the donor country is also an important part of aid money. So this could be geopolitical reasons, like what was happening during the Cold War. You can still see the same thing today. The US, for example, they spend most of their aid money in Afghanistan, for example, and that's clearly for geopolitical reasons. And you would also want to spread your own ideology of how you think that country should grow and prosper. As well as that idea of path dependency when it came to those aid centers. The examples I gave before, Lima and Addis Ababa, that it's just easier to work in those countries. So again, it's easier for the donor country to be able to work in Lima, so that's kind of where they'll send most of their resources, and that's also self-interest. And the final reason, which is more or less the most important, biggest reason, are historical reasons. So if your country has had colonies, or where you've given aid before, that's where most of your aid money will be spent today. So France, for example, they spend most of their money in development aid money in their ex-colonies, as well as French-speaking countries. So they've chosen ex-colonies, French-speaking countries. That's who we want to donate most of our money to. That's what we want to see develop, and that's where we'll send our money. UK also sends lots of their money in the direction of ex-colonies. Now they've recently stopped, said that they would stop giving aid money to India. So maybe we'll see a bit of a shift there, but as of right now, though, they're still spending most of their foreign aid money in ex-colonies. Spain, they say that they're spending most of their aid money on, they're spending it strategically, and that they're giving aid money to countries that traditionally don't get aid money. But if you look at the countries that they're actually giving their foreign aid money to, it also is their ex-colonies. So it's more likely that it's based on ex-colonies than strategic spending of their aid money. And Portugal is also kind of exactly the same, giving their aid money to former colonies. Now, fragmentation, I mentioned before, and you'll see this fragmentation of costs because there are these many different agencies and sectors, and they all want to sort of do good development work. And so in a country, you'll have many different institutions there. And what I mentioned before, you have this high bureaucratic costs then. When it comes to the allocation of aid, that you're causing the recipient country, you're causing them to have higher bureaucratic costs because more money is coming in from different directions, and each time that money comes in or a worker comes in, you need to sort of deal with them individually. So the bureaucratic costs are quite high then, and that's kind of a result of fragmentation. Now, also when it comes to fragmentation, you also see this sort of fragmentation of political thought and political self-interest. So first we had the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, and they were a set of goals and that countries worked towards. Now after that, after 2015 was the year, we've also had the Sustainable Development Goals. The Sustainable Development Goals, they have 17 goals, and each goal has different targets. After accounting for all those different targets, now you have 169 different targets. if you have 169 different ways that aid money or development workers should be working, that's a lot. So you have this fragmentation of ideas. Each person or each agency is working on multiple targets, and you'll see there's just too many ideas involved, and you can't sort of focus and tackle one particular issue. So again, you'll see this high fragmentation. Now, there have been studies that have shown that fragmentation of allocating aid money is connected with trade. So you have a country that trades with different countries in the developing world, and their aid money will follow that trade money. And that's how you would get fragmentation then. So you have all these different countries, they're doing the trade, and then the aid money follows their different countries trading with different countries. So you have this high degree of fragmentation because of that. So it's what I mentioned before, and what you would see in that debate, and Gerardo de Soto was talking, that the aid money follows the trade money. And because of that, then you'll see this high degree of fragmentation as well. Now, it seems somewhat contradictory, but you'll also have this idea of aid herding. Now, a herd is a group of animals that moves around together. And there have also been studies done that show that there is this degree of aid herding. So the idea is that if there's a natural disaster, then the aid money will go where that natural disaster is, and that's the idea of aid herding. And then when there's another natural disaster or something else, then it will move to another place. You could also, you would see it for these more humanitarian issues, but the idea is you would also see it for political change. So if there's a new government, let's say a dictator leaves, and now you have a democratic government, we can say that, okay, that's a better thing. Maybe we should focus some of our aid money there to make sure that democracy is stable, and then it can sort of develop on its own after that, but let's make sure it's stable, especially in those initial months, so it doesn't go back to a sort of a dictatorship. So there are positive reasons why you would have aid herding, because the aid community, the donor community, they're recognizing that there's a need in a particular place, and they're reacting to that need. Now, on the other hand, there are some cons, some negatives related to this as well. And it's quite difficult for a recipient country to be able to do any sort of long-term planning if they don't know how long that aid money will be coming in. If the aid money is only going to be there for 18 months, then they could plan for 18 months. But they don't really know how long it could be there. It could be there, it could come in, and then after a couple of months, it could leave and go somewhere else, or maybe it will stay there for 3 years. So it's quite difficult for the recipient country to be able to plan what they're going to do in the future, because the money is coming in and out and going out so quickly. Also, when you have these ideas when it comes to natural disasters, for example, you'll get such an influx of aid money there that it's overwhelming, and there's really no one knows how to deal with it because there's too much there. So if it were spread out over a longer period of time, it would be more logical, but we see a natural disaster, we see a tsunami, and we want to donate. We want to give our money as quickly as possible, or food or clothing or whatnot. But then you have this overburden of costs where that particular place is. So through studies done of this idea of aid herding, there was a sort of an assumption that you'd be able to see where that money is going based on, let's say, a political change. So you would be able to see, okay, there was a political change, now there's a democratic government, we can see that aid money congregates in that particular area, and now there's another government change, so aid money moves over there. Studies, on the other hand, haven't not been able to prove that. So they have shown that there is aid herding, but they haven't been able to figure out why there is aid herding. So that kind of makes it seem like it's being done for a different reason other than these sort of positive reasons of trying to, of the aid community seeing what's happening in the developing world and then acting accordingly. It might be happening for different reasons, but that's not exactly clear at the moment. other studies have sort of shown that the further you are away from the Millennium Development Goals, then the more aid money that you'll get. So this is sort of an example of a shift in the way aid money is being allocated. And you could probably say it's a positive trend in that countries, the poorest of the poor, who are not reaching those goals of the Millennium Development Goals, they're getting more aid money and more resources. So that's an example of the MDGs setting like this international criteria, and then aid money sort of doing that and moving in that direction so that those goals are met. Another way to think about aid is through selectivity. So that's where the aid money is sent. And I've mentioned this question already in previous video lectures, and that what is your aid money doing? Are you supporting corrupt or autocratic governments by giving aid to a particular country? If you are, is that necessarily a bad thing? You're going to have people in those situations who are extremely poor and don't have basic needs. They're poor, probably in large part due to their government, but if you don't help them, then they're going to suffer. But if you do help them, then you're supporting this autocratic government. So that's quite a difficult question for aid agencies to be able to solve. Now there are some countries, Belgium for example, that will not give aid money if the government in a particular country is not acting or behaving correctly, then they won't give aid money to that particular country. But then you'll see an issue where people will suffer because that aid money is no longer going in. So here you're getting a situation where with the data you have in place, then countries are able, like donor countries, are able to react to that data and give aid to those particular countries. Now, the issue though is based on this idea of GDP growth and fluctuation, is that do we have a good idea what is happening in the developing world? Do we know that if we're sending our aid money to countries that are experiencing growth, are they experiencing growth because of policies, or are they experiencing growth just because at this particular moment in their history they happen to be growing? Now, Morten Gerben, he's done another study testing the reliability, accuracy, and volatility of GDP growth in sub-Saharan Africa. So he takes 3 data sets and he wants to compare those 3 data sets. So the first thing he does is when it comes to accuracy. So these are sub-Saharan countries. They're all ranked from richest to poorest in 3 different data sets. And then he compares those data sets and he sees that the average variation of place is 7. So if there's a country that is, the average variation is higher than 7, then he takes them out of the study. So after that, he has 29 countries left in sub-Saharan Africa, and he can group them in low, middle, and high-income countries. The next thing he wants to check is the reliability of this data. So he has those 29 countries, and he wants to check the variation of their GDP. Now we have a GDP number. We know that that number isn't 100% accurate, so he puts in a variation of 30%. So it could be 30% higher or 30% lower of the figure that you have for GDP in a particular country. So when you do it this way, then Kenya, for example, it either is the 6th poorest country or it is the 8th richest country in sub-Saharan Africa. So you can see that's a big difference. So if you were doing your calculations and you saw that Kenya was the 8th richest country, you would sort of immediately get an idea, okay, I mean, Kenya must be doing something well. Let's look at their policies and let's also support that government through aid. by looking at the same numbers, you could figure out that they were the 6th poorest country. And then you would look at them and say, oh, wow, Kenya, you guys don't have the right policies. You need to change your policies. And if you were to change your policies, then you could receive more foreign aid money. So you can see that there's this huge spectrum, and it's unclear where that aid money should be going because we're not exactly sure what is actually happening in Kenya. The final thing that he looked at is volatility. So economies in Africa are particularly volatile, especially when it comes to the data, for 4 reasons. There's a low absolute income. So if you have a low income and you get a little bit more or a little bit less money than normally, as a percentage that is much bigger than in a developed country that has a higher absolute income. In Africa, there's a dominance of agriculture and weather, so yields can change every year. Yields can change every year. So in that situation, maybe you'll have more agriculture or less agriculture. Fluctuating world prices, agricultural prices often change a lot depending on the year. And the statistics are also not particularly good in a lot of sub-Saharan African countries, so then there'll just be variations based on statistical data. So after figuring all of that out, he takes it from 1960 until 2001, and he sort of makes a category, and he comes up with the 10 richest countries in sub-Saharan Africa. 9 of those countries were small island countries or small countries with lots of resources. And the 10th country was South Africa. So if you wanted to base your aid money on policies and having good policies, unfortunately the best policies that come from the study from Morton Jervin is that you need to be a small country with lots of natural resources.